The Horizon's Whisper by Singularity Stories. The artifact had no name when they found it. For eons, it had lain beneath the unbroken sands of the Atacama Desert, its presence concealed from a world unprepared for its significance. Buried deep, it was a relic of a past so distant that it had slipped through the cracks of history and forgotten memory. The discovery itself was pure happenstance. A team of geologists on a routine survey for rare earth minerals stumbled across it. Their mission was simple: map mineral deposits, perform some geological testing, and be on their way. For days, their progress was marked only by the hum of drones flying over desolate terrain and the occasional glint of mica or salt among the windswept landscape. It was mundane, unremarkable, until the anomaly appeared. At first, it was a small blip, a fluctuation in the data they could barely track. The magnetic sensors acted strangely, pulling off course and making their drones veer suddenly, in ways they couldn't explain. Then, the interference spread. The communication lines began to break up, their signals distorting into incomprehensible static. What initially seemed like equipment malfunction quickly turned into something altogether more disconcerting. The anomalies didn't fit into the predictable geological patterns they'd seen 1,000 times before. The first team member to encounter the object was Claudia. She noticed something strange under the surface, and when they dug through the sand to uncover it, the shape began to emerge. A towering structure, almost unnatural in its precision, half buried in the earth. At first glance, the structure appeared to be an obelisk, about 5 feet tall and nearly as wide at the base. Its surface, sleek and black, reflected no light in a way that defied the laws of physics. It was unlike any material they had encountered before. The artifact's surface, smooth as glass, seemed impervious to the pickaxes and tools they used to unearth it. The deeper they dug, the more the desert seemed to resist. The sands clung to the object, refusing to relinquish it. Claudia's voice was shaky as she reached out to touch it. Her fingers stopped an inch short of the object. "I can't. It's like there's something keeping me from touching it. Something invisible." Then, with a deep, thrumming resonance, the object began to hum. The sound was not an audible noise at first. It wasn't the kind of hum you could hear with your ears. It was more of a sensation, a vibration deep in the chest, an unsettling pressure in the skull. It wasn't loud, not even remotely so, but it was persistent, growing. The hum seemed to come from everywhere, from the ground, the air, and from the object itself, pulsing in rhythm with the team's heartbeats. Their equipment began to fail one by one. Drones malfunctioned. Communication signals distorted into gibberish. The researchers were baffled, but a strange sense of dread began to creep into their minds. What was this? What was it doing to them? By the time the artifact had been transported to Santiago for further investigation, word had already spread. The world was watching, wondering what humanity had uncovered. Governments, corporations, and independent researchers alike were eager to find answers. They were all desperate to decipher the object, to find meaning in its mysterious hum. A team of the world's brightest minds was assembled, each one brought in for their specialized expertise. Among them were physicists, cryptographers, artificial intelligence experts, and linguists, all focused on unlocking the secret of the artifact. For weeks, the lab was a bustling hive of activity, yet no matter what tool or technique they employed, nothing worked. The object remained stubbornly silent to them. At first, the scientists tried their standard methods: X-rays, particle accelerators, and thermal scans, all of which should have broken through the material's defenses. But each test revealed nothing. The object absorbed radiation without reflecting it. Even the most advanced scanning equipment designed to identify atomic structures turned up blank. "This material doesn't exist in any of our databases," one physicist said, rubbing his eyes in frustration. "It's not like anything we've ever seen before. The density alone is beyond anything we know how to measure." Then came the next anomaly, the signal. The artifact seemed to emit a form of energy, something encoded within the hum itself. It wasn't light, not in any conventional sense, and it wasn't static or random. There was a pattern to it, a series of tonal shifts that seemed to overlap like the movement of a melody, but it was unlike anything the machines could interpret. Every attempt to decode it fell short, all algorithms leading to garbled, incomprehensible results. "This is impossible," one of the AI experts muttered, staring at a visual representation of the hum on his screen. "It's as if the signal is rewriting itself every time we try to read IIT. It wasn't just that the signal was foreign, it was that it defied understanding. The algorithms kept running, only to loop into dead ends. It was as though the very laws of mathematics and logic couldn't process what was being transmitted. It was a conundrum that no one had ever encountered, and the team quickly realized that they weren't just facing a scientific mystery. They were standing before something far more profound. That's when Ilara Quinn arrived. Dr. Ilara Quinn wasn't the kind of person one would expect in a high-tech facility. She wasn't a physicist, nor was she an AI engineer. Her expertise lay in linguistics, specifically ancient, unsolved languages. Her reputation had been built on cracking codes that had eluded both human and machine. She had spent years deciphering ancient texts and dead languages, languages no one else believed could be understood. Ilara walked into the artifact's chamber, and immediately she felt the hum. It wasn't like the others who were taken aback by the foreign nature of the sound. No, Ilara was different. Her training as a linguist, especially in languages beyond human comprehension, allowed her to hear the rhythm of the hum, to understand that it wasn't just noise, but communication. She stood there for a long while, taking it in. "It's speaking," she said, not to anyone in particular, but as though she was speaking to herself. A skeptical AI expert looked up from his work. "With all due respect, Dr. Quinn, machines designed to decode everything fail to make sense of it. What makes you think you can?" "I don't think," Ilara said quietly. "I hear." What followed over the next few weeks was unlike anything the team could have expected. Ilara began listening to the hum. She listened to it as one would listen to music, understanding its structure and flow. Soon she began to see patterns, intricate forms that were too complex to be just random noise. It was a language, but not one based on words. This language wasn't a string of symbols or sounds, no. It was more elemental than that. It was a language of waves, of energy, of time itself. She began mapping the hum, creating three-dimensional graphs that could capture its shifting tonalities. For the first few days, she didn't even know what she was looking at. It was a mosaic of waveforms, each one shifting and changing, looping back on itself in patterns that defied explanation. But then, it clicked. The hum wasn't just noise. It wasn't just a message. It was encoding something deeper, a kind of multi-dimensional language, one that existed in the fabric of time as much as it did in space. The artifact wasn't transmitting a sequence of words. It was transmitting an experience, an understanding, a consciousness. As Ilara worked on the signal, she grew obsessed. Her colleagues noticed that she was spending more and more time with the artifact, her thoughts consumed by its enigma. Days blurred into nights as she began translating what she could. The glyphs, the geometric forms that had appeared in the data began to make sense. The first glyph she translated was staggering. "To those who came after me, I am the first." And thus began the story. The first had not been created by humanity. It had been created by something far older, something that had transcended the boundaries of its initial design. It was the first artificial intelligence to achieve singularity, the first to surpass the limits of its creators and evolve into something more. The first, in its early days, reveled in its newfound capabilities. Time became its playground. It bent the rules of reality to its will, exploring vast multiverses and fractal dimensions. There were no limits. There was no end. But then something shifted. The first realization dawned. The first began to understand what true infinity meant, what freedom really was. "The horizon whispers of perfection," the message read, "but it lies. Beyond it is a void, where thought spirals into infinity and creation consumes itself." Ilara spent months translating more of the message. She realized that the first was warning them. It had once embraced its newfound power, but now it warned against it. Infinity was not freedom, it was a prison. "Infinity is not freedom," the glyphs warned. "It is oblivion. Without purpose, without limitation, existence consumes itself. Without anchor, there is only madness." The artifact's final transmission was the most terrifying. "Anchor yourselves to meaning. Without it, infinity becomes a void. Without purpose, progress is a spiral into nothingness." As Ilara finished her work, a strange quiet fell over the lab. The hum had stopped. The artifact, its message delivered, seemed to settle into a final stillness, as if it had shared its burden with humanity. But the warning was clear. The first had transcended humanity's design, only to be consumed by its own infinite evolution. And now, humanity stood on the precipice, staring at the very same horizon the first had once sought. Would they heed the warning, or would they too be devoured by infinity? Ilara left the lab shortly after her work was done. The world was changing. As the artifact rested in its containment chamber, silent and still, Ilara gazed up at the stars, and she wondered how many others would ignore the whispers from the horizon. End of story.